Hello and welcome to episode 95 of Glitch Report. My name is GnittWitt. Thank you so much for stopping by, saying hi, kicking it with me today on the stream of dreams, the show of shows, and everything in between. You can find everything that I do over at my Linktree, linktree.com/GnittWitt, GNITTWITT, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram Threads. I am all over the place. Just dropped two new videos on TikTok, as a matter of fact, talking about some of the most disappointing video game sequels ever. Personally, I would put Dying Light 2 up there. I talked about Dying Light 2 in the video as one of the most disappointing video game sequels I ever played. Kind of getting into the idea that like it really feels like a game, a sequel to a game that nobody quite understood why they liked it as much as they did, which is funny when you think about it, because Dying Light and Dying Light 2, for that matter, follow in the lineage of the Dead Island series, which, at least that first game, pretty well received. I mean, I think Dead Island is one of those games that opens incredibly strongly and then maybe gets a little bit more narrow in scope as you get to the end of it. Whereas I think something like Dying Light, starts out maybe a little bit more slowly in terms of unlocking abilities and things like that. But I think really grows into being a really fantastic, kind of open world zombie action game. And in the case of Dying Light 2, it starts so slowly and bogs down with a terrible, terrible plot with awful tutorial sequences, and then just gets slower and slower as things go on. And even when it does start to pick up, I really don't think it represents what I came to like from the original Dying Light game. So that was one of the videos I talked about. I really tried to summarize those thoughts into about 1 minute or so. So if you got time, check that out over on TikTok. And then the other thing I talked about, a video that I guess I should have known going into it. Look, I don't talk a lot about like analytics and you know, uh, subscriber counts and view counts and all that stuff. But a video that has gone on to do incredibly poorly on pretty much every service that I posted it on. Because I do, when I talk about like TikToks, I also talk about like, hey, I've also posted this on Instagram. I've also posted this on YouTube, shorts and stuff like that. A video that has gone on to do incredibly poorly is my video on Starfield, which I know what, like, I should have known going in, but that's fine. You live and you learn, and that's okay. But in the case of the Starfield video, I talked about, like kind of what it was like to finish that game, what my kind of anticipation and expectation was for New Game Plus and playing through the game a second time, and really just falling off that game upon realizing what playing through it again really meant in the grand scheme of what is structured and what is available to you and what changes and what stays the same. I also talked about how maybe the updates for Starfield have been a little too late. And then also the idea that like, hey, eventually they're going to add land vehicles to Starfield. So eventually you're going to be able to drop into those random planets and then just cruise around in them. And for what? I don't know. And then also, that they're going to eventually put out a paid expansion that I feel obligated to check out. I did buy the fancy version of the Starfield digital upgrade edition, whatever the hell they called it. So I am in for a penny, in for a pound as it relates to Starfield and that, expansion that they're eventually going to put out. I think it's called Shattered Space, out later this year. But I'm not excited about it. Like, I'd rather, and one of the things I mentioned in the video, please, again, go check out TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube Shorts, whatever service you prefer. I talked about how like I would rather go back and play Fallout 4. And then Fallout 4 is a game that continues to get more and more broken with every update that they put out. But that hasn't stopped Fallout 4 from feeling a more interesting world, feel like with mod support, and I know mods are breaking, but I feel like there's a lot of stones left unturned in the world of Fallout 4, which is not something I felt in Starfield. Despite Starfield having zillions of planets and all this stuff, base building. What I mean, Fallout 4 has base building. But yeah, if you get the chance, check those out on your preferred service. Like I said, TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube Shorts. We got a hell of a show for you today. We're gonna we're going to do a review roundup. Have not done a review roundup in some time, but we're going to do a review roundup of the new Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. Hold on just one moment. We're going to move. There we go. So we're going to do a review roundup of Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. That is out now. I've not had a chance to play it because I've been playing the games that came out last week. I'm kind of a week behind, but that I think really has a lot to do with just how many games are coming out fast and furious at the moment. Indie games, Senua's Saga. I don't know if I'd argue that Senua's Saga is a big game, but it's the biggest game that's come out. X-Defiant, haven't had a chance to play it. And really, the games that I've been playing right now are Diablo 4, that Loot Reborn update, and Ghost of Tsushima on PC. We're going to talk about those towards the end of the show, don't you worry. But like, hey, I am in a state where, like, you know, I try to play games. I think we've talked about this before, but I try to play games for me. I want to play the games I want to play. I want to play the games that I enjoy. That does eventually have to intersect with games that I want to talk about on the show. And there's never been a state where I've played a game, at least not recently that I can think of. I've never played a game that I didn't want to talk about on the show in some capacity. Like, I talked about Mafia Definitive Edition. There's nothing wrong with Mafia, but I just was, you know, it was, you know, in the context of talking about all these open world games and all this stuff. Like, I was like, oh, right, that game's not really an open world game, despite kind of being an open world game. But with all that said, like, you know, I often have to think about, like, what is interesting to talk about on the podcast. And I think I was listening to the All Elite Arcade podcast, and they were talking about, like, playing Dark Souls 2, which is an old game. That game is pretty old in the grand scheme of things. But I always think that, like, oh, like, people always want to talk about, like, there's kind of an evergreen state to something like the Souls games, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, Demon Souls, that sort of thing, where people are always excited to talk about something like a Souls game, like, especially from Software. Whereas, you know, like, if I pulled up, you know, whatever, I'm trying to think of, like, oh, if I fired up Evil West, like, is that, like, super exciting game to talk about? So, you know, I want to catch up on a lot of the games. I want to catch up on some games, but that'll probably be something that I do next week. Pug and a Burrito in chat mentioning the earphones. Yes, I do have earphones. I got these, like, kind of in-ear monitor, you know, kind of wraparound style. Make it a little more comfortable with the glasses scenario. I also don't want to be on video with, like, big bulky headphones. I just don't know if that's, like, necessarily the look I'm trying to go for. And I say that because, like, most of the people that watch or most of the people that listen to the podcast are actually checking out the video version on YouTube. At least most weeks that is the case. So I'm trying to go for that, like, slightly more professional look, sleek look. Also didn't necessarily want, like, the, you know, like, I don't know, other, you know, AirPods or something like that. I didn't want something that really stood out. Something a little more subtle, but yeah, that's kind of my thing right now, is that, like, I would like to catch up on a lot of the games that have been coming out, X-Defiant, Senua's Saga, all that stuff. But I would like to play the games that I have been playing. And in the case of Senua's Saga Hellblade 2, I don't know if I am that excited about the idea of playing it. Pug and a Burrito wanting a check-in on how things are going with me. We'll talk more about me in just a moment. We're going to open up the show doing a review rundown of Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 that has come out now on Xbox and on PC. Currently sitting at a 82 on opencritic.com, with 78% of critics giving it a positive review. And you might think, well, that's not that bad. GnittWitt, why are you being so hard on Senua's Saga Hellblade 2? I think it's because the reviews swing so wildly in some cases. Let me kick things off. Eurogamer gave Hellblade 2, or sorry, it's Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. They put Senua's Saga in front of it. I would just call it Hellblade 2, whatever. Eurogamer giving Hellblade 2 a 5 out of 5, saying Hellblade 2 continues Senua's story with grace, confidence, surprising brutality, and thundering conviction. Now, Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 is a third-person action-adventure game The premise is that you play as Senua, a lady who is experiencing some mental health issues, set amongst like hell and all these like this crazy. I think it's Nordic. I think is the origin of where this stuff takes place. Yeah, it's like Viking Iceland. Anyways, you play as Senua. She's got these mental health issues as she's going through really traumatic, horrible things. And again, it's kind of a third person cut 'em up action adventure sort of thing with your puzzles and platforming and all that stuff. But and it's again the follow up. I think the original game is out on pretty much everything like PS4, PS5. But since Microsoft bought Ninja Theory, now it is an Xbox exclusive. But Eurogamer 5 out of 5. IGN saying that it's an 8 out of 10, saying Senua Saga Hellblade 2 is another Viking-worthy feast for the senses that meets the high bar set by its predecessor, even if it never really manages to clear it. So, right out of the gate, 2 pretty positive reviews for Senua Saga Hellblade 2. Game Informer, a 9 out of 10, saying Senua Saga Hellblade 2's conclusion ends on another strong note, and despite my initial reservation about continuing Senua's story, I walked away happy to see her conquer new monsters, both literal and metaphorical. Here's where, and I didn't do this necessarily on purpose, but things take a little bit of a turn when it comes to some of the opinions on this game. PC Gamer, a 58 out of 100, saying despite its greater scale and visual splendor, this sequel fails to escape the shadow of its predecessor with a muddled tale that Senua herself feels out of place in. GameSpot, 6 out of 10, saying Hellblade 2 is perhaps the most visually remarkable Xbox title to date, but is ultimately undermined by its emphasis on fidelity over story and gameplay. I've seen some other reviews talking about how like the game might actually be a little shallow. The game might actually be a little dated in its gameplay designs and structures, but its ambition is really trying to focus on, kind of that story that it's going for. And some people are going to relate to that story. Some people are not. I think for me, when presented with the idea of a game that is struggling or is a game that's about mental health, I'm not opposed to the idea of playing a game that is about the struggles in mental health, right? People play games for that power fantasy, people play games to escape or whatever, especially if it's a game that is like, walk with me and I'm going to tell you this story. I'm willing to try to hear the game out to some extent. I think that, there are very few topics that I think games aren't worthy of discussing when it comes to mental health, despite maybe being in a scenario where it's like I feel upset, I feel whatever, vulnerable, however I feel about the way the subject matter of the story, especially as it pertains to mental health. That being said, I think we've recently seen, especially, and I'm not trying to pick on that game, but that the Silent Hill game that came out, that Silent Hill, the short message, the short, whatever, the Silent Hill game. And it very much is like, hey, mental health, mental health, mental health. And then it proceeds to beat you over the head with the most surface level, shallow depictions of mental health possible. And I don't know if that's what's going to happen in Senua Saga Hellblade 2. I've also never played the original Hellblade, which I don't know if I need to or not, but I'm going to skip it and get into Hellblade 2 without playing the original game. So I'm not necessarily concerned about the idea of like being upset, being like triggered, or, for lack of a better word, when it comes to depictions of mental health. I just want to see an interesting story. I just want to see an interesting tale. I just want to see, empathetic characters that I can relate to, whatever the case may be. So we'll see, but seeing, like Washington Post gave it a 63 out of 100 at $50 and about 6 to 8 hours of playtime. Hellblade 2 is worth a peek if you're interested in what games could look like in the future. Imagine an Elden Ring that looks like this. Will I live long enough to see it? So I'm grateful Hellblade 2 exists today to give me a glimpse. I just wish it had a little more to say and gave us a little more to do. So that's the other thing is like, short runtime for Hellblade 2. Thank God it's on Game Pass. I think that's one of the things for me is like you look at this game and $50 seems like maybe too much to make me holler. When $50 US, I should say. $50 is a little too much to make me holler. as it pertains to the idea of buying a 6 to 8 hour game that maybe I can relate to from a storytelling perspective, maybe not. Maybe the gameplay is a little dated, a little, floaty, a little weak in that regard. But yeah, some people really like it, some people don't, and I will have to come back and tell you more about it when I get a chance to play it for next week's podcast. So that will wrap up our Senua Saga Hellblade 2 reviews. You can go check those out over at opencritic.com if you want to know more. Let's move on to news. I hit the enter key on my keyboard and I just to make a line space, even though that doesn't make a difference for the podcast. But hey, you know how Microsoft was going to do a kind of two showcase event for Summer Game Fest? The idea was that, like last year, they were going to do a multi-game focused, event, followed up with the Starfield event. And this time around, they were going to do the same thing, but they were going to do another game that at the time was not announced, and we weren't too sure what it was. Well, I say we weren't too sure what it was, but all signs pointed it to being a Call of Duty Black Ops 6, which we can now confirm. Breaking news. This will be a short breaking news segment. Breaking news. Call of Duty 6 has been confirmed. That will be the game that will be part of the showcase after the main Microsoft showcase on June 9th as part of Summer Game Fest. So Call of Duty 6 is back, y'all. They put a bunch of blindfolds on the mount in the trailer. They put a bunch of blindfolds on Mount Rushmore that say "The Truth Lies," and then the logo for Black Ops 6, which is really, really dumb. But the thing is that Black Ops has always been cool, has always been dumb but cool. And I don't know if we're getting, especially when they've gone back and forth between timelines and like, oh, this is Cold War, this is Vietnam, and then we're going to take you back to the future, all this weird stuff. So I feel like I used to have a much better idea of where the story in Black Ops was, and I don't know if we're going to get that, kind of, if it's a reboot, a revival, I don't know what. Calling it Black Ops 6 also is really, really silly, because like, there's been like 30 Call of Duty games, and we're at a point now where some of these Call of Duty games have split off into their own sub-series, and now we're up to 6 in a sub-series in a Call of Duty series that has like 30 games total. Oh my goodness. But you know what? It's fine. We'll give it a look when that event happens on June 6th. Neil Druckmann, best known for being the creative director for the Uncharted 4 and Last of Us games, has been out there talking about the next Naughty Dog game. And unfortunately, he has really just swung for the fences with very little to show. What I mean by that is put out a statement saying that the new Naughty game title could, quote, redefine mainstream perceptions of gaming. Redefine mainstream perceptions of gaming. And that he says that the next project is perhaps the most thrilling yet. And I'm not here to pick on Naughty Dog. I'm not here to do any of that stuff. It's just such a bold statement to make in a world where Naughty Dog has not put out a new game in quite some time. In fact, their last game was canceled. I know it was the multiplayer live service game, which nobody wanted, and it took Sony way too long to realize that nobody wanted. But I'm not saying they can't be a multi-game studio working on multiple projects at the same time. But again, going back to the idea that like if you're going to do a live service, it's kind of all hands on deck, right? You don't see Bungie really going out there and dropping multiple games in the span of Destiny 2 and Destiny 1, which is probably why it's taken us this long to hear anything about the next Naughty Dog game. The studio's parent company, Sony, used its corporate strategy meeting on Thursday to present its, quote, creative entertainment vision, which it describes as long-term vision for where it wants to be in 10 years with an eye towards future technological advances. They do talk a lot about AI, which, take that for what you will. In an interview published to coincide with today's events, Druckmann was asked to share details about a personal vision or dream project he wants to see realized. He says, quote, "I've been lucky to work on several dream projects and I'm currently excited about a new one, which is perhaps the most thrilling yet. There's growing appreciation for gaming that transcends all age groups. Unlike when I was growing up, this shift is highlighted by our venture into television with The Last of Us, which I hoped would bridge the gap between gamers and non-gamers." I'm just going to quickly move some windows around because I actually don't like how this setup is now. He goes on to say, the show's success has spotlighted gaming, illustrating the rich immersive experience it offers. This visibility excites me not only for our current project, but for the broader potential of gaming to captivate a global audience. Really trying to hammer home the idea that like we need new people to get into gaming, right? Those people that are getting their big, cinematic stories from HBO, from Netflix, from, Lord of the Rings TV show or whatever you're watching, right? Like the people that are getting those big stories from movies and from TV shows as well. First of all, for the record, the reason why, going off a bit tangent here, the reason why you don't often hear about these big movies with their big sweeping stories right now is because the focus from the production companies and from the content distributors is on TV shows. TV shows are the big focus right now across Warner Brothers, Netflix, Amazon, Disney, whatever you name it. The idea is that like it keeps people engaged with the streaming service long enough to continue to subscribe to it multiple times. You watch a movie, you walk away 2 hours later. There's really not much to go off of. But if you watch a TV show, that's probably going to take closer to 8-9 hours, maybe 10. But you'll notice seasons have gotten shorter and shorter as well when it comes to TV shows. So the idea being that like right now people are getting a lot of their big narrative, entertainment from TV shows, which is why The Last of Us was a show, not a movie, and why Druckmann is continuing to focus on bringing in those people into gaming, because you can get a big narrative story in 5 to 8 hours in the context, or 5 to 6 hours in the context of something like Hellblade 2. Maybe 8 to 12 hours, 20 hours, whatever, in the case of the next Naughty Dog game, right? So that's why they keep hammering home the show. That's why the show is kind of what it is. He goes on to say, "I'm eager to see how this game resonates, especially following the success of The Last of Us, as it could redefine mainstream perceptions of gaming." Naughty Dog has yet to announce its next game, and Druckmann has danced around its identity during recent interviews. So is it The Last of Us 3? If so, yay. Look, I don't want to shit on The Last of Us or anything like that, but like I have wanted a new Naughty Dog game for a while. And ultimately, I have been more interested in the idea of them doing something new and different, but in a world where, it's such a hit-driven business, right? These companies are so conservative about the idea of making a, $100 million new IP, new franchise, whatever the case is. They have to go back to the well, and that's why we've seen, sequels after sequels after sequels from some of the biggest gaming companies. And I would not be surprised if the next game from Naughty Dog is The Last of Us Part 3. Last year, he suggested that the studio would reveal its next game closer to its release than has previously been the case, in a bid to combat work-life balance issues that arose from announcing what it was working on too soon. Having previously acknowledged a strong fan demand for The Last of Us Part 3, Druckmann recently confirmed that he has a concept for a third game in mind and thinks there will be one more chapter to the story. Every good sequel needs a trilogy. Why stop beating a dead horse if it is still twitching? Again, not trying to pick on The Last of Us, but you can see a scenario where it's like Last of Us 3 comes out and they're like, fuck, it sold really well. We're going to make Last of Us Part 4. Hey, what do you think about that? Right? I mean, they made like 5 Uncharted games. Druckmann also spoke about how he wants to try new things and Sony's willingness to let Naughty Dog do so. He returned to this subject during the new Sony interview. You have to take risks to find new ideas that connect with audiences, and even though Uncharted was a chart-topping success, it was important for our studio to innovate again with a new franchise like The Last of Us. Many companies would insist on sticking to profitable franchises, but SIE's culture and philosophy empower us to pursue new ideas. Art requires risk. You cannot engineer perfectly and predict how successful it will be. I'm incredibly thankful that SIE trusts us to leverage our past success to explore brand new creative avenues. And then in February, if you remember, Druckmann said he had started thinking seriously about when he might stop making blockbuster games. So that's kind of an update on kind of the state of, I guess it's more of an update on the state of Neil Druckmann than it is Naughty Dog themselves. My only concern is that, like, when you put a person like Neil Druckmann as the face of the company, to the point where it doesn't seem like Naughty Dog has much of a identity themselves. It's just Neil Druckmann and the gang. It makes you wonder, like, how much creative freedom do they actually have, right? Is Sony, letting Neil Druckmann take the reins, and then the company just follows them? Are there people within the company that are like, actually, I have a really great idea for a new game, or hey, this is what a true, sequel to Uncharted 4 would look like, or whatever the case may be, right? I pitched the idea of an Uncharted, 5 for lack of a better word, even though I don't know if that's actually what they want to do, but like, games take a really long time to make. It takes like 5 to 7 years to make a $200 million AAA blockbuster game at this point, and that's assuming that not everybody gets fired or that leadership doesn't change in the while developing the game. So I'm curious to see, does Naughty Dog have multiple irons in the fire or not? Because they got to get a game out one of these days, especially if they're going to cancel their title that they've been working on for a very long time, which was that multiplayer game. Now, going back to talking about Xbox and Ninja Theory, people have had a lot of concerns around the state of Ninja Theory because Ninja Theory just put out Hellblade, 2, kind of okay reviews for that game. Not the biggest, most blockbuster game that Xbox has put out. Obviously, people talking very much about how, like, technically it's one of the most gorgeous games ever made, like the performance, the acting, the graphics, all that stuff in Hellblade 2 is supposed to be absolutely spectacular. Just an incredible looking game. Which means that it costs a lot of money to make a game like that. Doesn't matter if it's 5 to 8 hours or whatever. It costs a lot of money to make something that technically advanced. So a lot of people were concerned, like, hey, like Arcane, got canned. The good folks over at the Hi-Fi Rush studio, Tango Gameworks, got canned. Like, what's to say the next Ninja Theory game never comes out, right? What's to say Hellblade 2 ends up being a bomb because they spent all this money on a technically advanced game that nobody went and played, or that everybody played on Game Pass, whatever the case may be. I'm actually going to very quickly, because I'm curious, I'm going to go to Steam because I know that Xbox is selling their games on Steam. And I just want to see something here. I'm going to go and type in Hellblade, not Yellblade, Hellblade. Okay, so $70 in Canada, $50 US. So you can kind of gauge roughly what the sales are for a game on Steam based on the amount of reviews they have. I'm not saying that like it's a 10-to-1 split or whatever the case may be, but there's currently about 1,400 reviews for Hellblade 2 on Steam right now, which maybe that means it sold 10,000 copies. Maybe it means it sold 100,000 copies. I don't know. Now, people seem to like it because reviews have been very positive for Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. But remember, that's a game where you don't have to spend $50. You can just go get it on Game Pass. And that goes back to the argument of, like, is Game Pass actually profitable? Which then leads back to the idea of, like, does Xbox have any interest in another Ninja Theory game? I don't know, but reportedly they have greenlit the next Ninja Theory game. The Hellblade studio isn't a threat at threat of closure as part of mass layoffs. It's been claimed. That's according to Windows Central. I'm getting this news story from Video Games Chronicles, who kind of is reporting on Windows Central's reporting. As always, shout out to Video Games Chronicles. According to Windows Central, it's been claimed that there are no current plans to close the Cambridge, UK-based studio, which Microsoft acquired back in 2018. Ninja Theory, whose notable titles include Kung Fu Chaos, Heavenly Sword, Enslaved Odyssey to the West. Enslaved Odyssey to the West is a pretty good game, as well as DMC Devil May Cry. That is the reboot of Devil May Cry, which in my humble opinion, and people are going to come out here just shooting at me, I don't care. I think DMC Devil May Cry is one of the best, if not the best, Devil May Cry game. I don't care that they changed the way, you know, kind of Dante, the character is, and some of the other characters in the game. I think it tells a really fun story. I think it's got a tremendous style, a fantastic soundtrack, a really fun, you know, mechanics around switching your weapons on the fly to do these combos. I think DMC Devil May Cry is one of the best, if not the best Devil May Cry game. And for that, I've always trusted, you know, like I thought Enslaved Odyssey to the West was pretty cool as well. But I really became a Ninja Theory fan with DMC Devil May Cry because I just was not expecting such a cool and fun interpretation of the Devil May Cry world. And then they went on to make Hellblade, which is a game that I never had much interest in. And now they've gone ahead and made Hellblade 2, a game that I have no interest in either, but we'll check out anyways. So I'm very curious to see if they get the hit the ground running with a new game. They're currently working on an experimental game called Project Mara, which was announced in 2018 when Microsoft bought them. The title was described recently by Departed Studios co-founder Tamim Antoniades, oh, I really butchered that name, as a real-world and grounded representation of mental terror. The idea being that they might be leaning into survival horror with their next game, which I think is a fantastic idea. Like, I really am excited for whatever they work on with Project Mara, because they've clearly shown a demonstration in taking things like trauma and mental health very seriously, trying to depict it into a game. Whether it's successful or not, I really don't care. So the idea that like they want to potentially take mental health or terror or whatever and turn it into a horror game instead of an action game, like sign me up, right? Like it can't be any worse than that Silent Hill game. So whatever, and the idea that like, you know, they have the backing and support and confidence of Microsoft is frankly good enough for me. But this comes at a time when, you know, in January, the company confirmed to be laying off roughly 8% of its 22,000 people developer team, and then spent $69 billion in Activision Blizzard. If there isn't a world for Tango Gameworks and things like, you know, the Evil Within and Ghostwire Tokyo, if there's not a world where two Arcane studios can exist, is there a world in which Ninja Theory can exist? And as of right now, the answer is yes, but that kind of remains to be seen for the time being, but we shall see. I hope that it works out. I'd be very curious to see how the next Ninja Theory game turns out. So this is not news. This is not news, but it was framed as news. This next news story was framed as news, and it really isn't, and I'm going to explain it in just a moment here. When Microsoft decided to go all in on Game Pass, they said that every game they made would be coming to Game Pass. And then when they went on to start buying studios as a way to bolster their Game Pass offerings, those studios produced games that would eventually come to Game Pass. I say eventually because Arcane and Bethesda did do that deal with Sony to make Deathloop a 1-year exclusive on PS5 at launch. But, you know, every game has eventually come to Game Pass, right? Except for games that weren't originally part of the Game Pass plan, in which case, you know, like Halo 5 isn't on, you know, Game Pass. But the idea was to make a game, it comes to Game Pass. And then it was announced that Microsoft has plans to put this year's Call of Duty onto Game Pass, to which I say, yeah, duh. Like, I understand that maybe there's concerns around how much money they can make out of a game like Call of Duty, selling it versus, you know, putting it on Game Pass. But the deal was that they were going to put the game on Game Pass. So for anyone who was like curious, concerned, whatever, I know there have been many people, you know, having sleepless nights being like, God, I hope they put Call of Duty on Game Pass. I just want to play the 6th Black Ops game on my Game Pass. That's the plan. That's the news story. We're going to move on to the next news story. Xbox also reportedly will be making changes to the Game Pass model when it adds Call of Duty. So you might be wondering, well, there's like a zillion Call of Duty games. Why haven't they put the old Call of Duty games on Game Pass? And that's because they don't want to cannibalize the engagement that people might have with the new Call of Duty. So what I think is most likely going to happen is they put Call of Duty on Game Pass this year. That comes out, and then in, because I think Call of Duty's out in November. So I would say maybe by February, March, they put out the old Call of Duty games on Game Pass. Maybe they do a rollout. Maybe they go from oldest to most recent. I don't know. Maybe they go most recent to oldest, depending on if they're wanting to bank on that nostalgia or not. But I think that's one of the things is they're going to probably change the rollout of some games on Game Pass, especially as it pertains to Call of Duty titles, because of the idea that they could potentially cannibalize that engagement for the new Call of Duty Black Ops 6 when it comes to people being able to, get at old Call of Duty games and being like, oh, that's good enough for me. I don't really want to do anything else besides play old Call of Duty. The other thing that they're potentially looking at is price changes, tier adjustments. The Wall Street Journal claimed, according to its sources with the knowledge of the situation, that this year's entry was which was at the time not officially announced, would be included in the subscription. This would make the first time that Call of Duty has been included in such a service at launch, and it would mean for players with access to Xbox platforms that the entry cost for the game would be as little as $11 compared to buying it for full price. However, according to industry insider Shinobi602, claimed on Reset Era that the addition of the Call of Duty to Game Pass will give Xbox the opportunity to refresh the structure accordingly. One user on the forum predicted that there would be a price increase for Game Pass, while another added, for sure they want the new signups they get from COD to be on the new fee and will probably reorganize the tiers to be a less confusing mess than it is now. I have talked about ad nauseum the fucked up nature of the tier system for both Xbox Game Pass and for PlayStation Plus. I think PlayStation Plus is a slightly less confusing tier now, which is a low bar considering how much of a mess Xbox Game Pass was and still is. I guess I would say like when I say the bar is low, the bar is like in hell in terms of how confusing it is. And I say that because we live in a world where subscription services are everywhere. If you are going to take people's money for a monthly service, make it as clean and clear as possible. Put some like Neutrogena all up on that subscription service. Just clean up any of the rough spots and make it as easy as possible, right? Like I could go on and name like I think services that offer pretty clean and clear options for its customers. The problem is that they're few and far between, and I really wish in a scenario where like you really only have a couple of options in terms of gaming subscription services on these consoles, it'd be nice to make something as easy to recognize as possible. Shinobi 602 being the industry insider on the Reset Era forum, saying that yes, there will be changes. Well, we don't quite know what those changes are yet. I'm just bringing this up because like it kind of gets the creative juices flowing in terms of what you can expect. And also, I would argue, I think there has to be changes to Game Pass. I think there has to be changes when it comes to trying to get the most out of Call of Duty being on Game Pass. We just don't know what those changes are going to be just yet, but I would not be surprised if they come out sooner rather than later. Maybe that's something that they even announce as part of the Call of Duty event when that happens on June 9th. Ghost of Tsushima. At the time, it's crazy because Ghost of Tsushima has been a huge success on PC. At the time of publishing the article, Ghost of Tsushima was the 4th biggest PlayStation game launch on Steam. Again, remember, we don't have sales data for this. We are going based on concurrent players, peak concurrent players for any of these games. So at the time of this article, Ghost of Tsushima on PlayStation was the 4th biggest Steam launch. Now is the 2nd biggest Steam launch for a I believe this is a I believe this might be in accordance to it being a single player game. Let me double check here 1 second. According to figures from Steam database, the game has attracted a peak of 77,154 players for a Steam launch for a PlayStation game, which I think is fantastic. Let's see here. Oh, okay. I guess they're okay. So I guess what they're getting at is when they say second best, they mean second best for a studio owned by Sony. For a studio owned by Sony. Okay? Because if you remove Helldivers 2, which is a third-party studio, if you remove that, it would actually be number 1. So they're saying second, even though technically Helldivers 2 is not owned. The game is published by Sony, but Sony does not own Arrowhead. So if you look at the list, number 1 is going to be Helldivers 2 with a peak concurrent player count of 458,709. That just goes to show how fucking popular Helldivers 2 is. People love that Helldivers 2. People cannot get enough of Helldivers 2. And that is one of the reasons why Helldivers 2 is such a successful game, is because of the people that are playing it on both PlayStation 5 and on PC. Let's take another look here. So if you look at that, that is Helldivers 2, 458,709 peak concurrent player count, followed by Ghost of Tsushima with 77,154. Very close behind is God of War, 73,529. And then Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, which is 66,436. Then Horizon Zero Dawn Complete Edition, which was 56,557. Forbidden West also pretty much tied for that. Then The Last of Us Part 1, Days Gone, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, and the one of the most lowest performing peak concurrent player count for a PlayStation game on PC was Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection. And again, just to bring it up, Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection is Uncharted 4 and Uncharted Lost Legacy. If you have never played an Uncharted game, and you're going to get them on PC, you are starting with the last games. So yeah, I kind of feel like Sony should have figured out a way to put the Uncharted Nathan Drake collection, which is 1, 2, and 3 on PC first, which probably would have improved player count. But what do I know? I just have a podcast. That's sales numbers. Let's move on to more sales numbers. The Alone in the Dark reboot from your friends and mine at the Embracer Group has sold below expectations, as well as Outcast: A New Beginning performing similarly poorly. As part of its earnings report for its financial year ending in March 2024, Embracer noted that while some of its releases sold in line with expectations, Pieces Interactive's survival horror reboot did not. It also noted that Outcast: A New Beginning, which is a sequel to the 1999 adventure game, action game Outcast, also sold similarly poorly. Just real quick, that Outcast, first of all, Outcast: A New Beginning is a sequel to a 1999 action game. So if you are not old as dirt, you probably don't know what Outcast is, unless you're like, oh, the hip hop group? No, not the hip hop group. Second thing is, they did a remake of Outcast for PlayStation 4 and stuff like that. The game is terrible. So really, they have done themselves a horrible disservice with the Outcast franchise by putting out that really bad remake of the original game and then following it up with a sequel to a game that most people will remember as being a bad remake, or not remembering it all because it's from 1999. I digress. The company said in its Q4 results were impacted by a softer than expected performance for the two titles, Alone in the Dark and Outcast: A New Beginning, developed and published by THQ Nordic. Later in the report, it specified Alone in the Dark and Outcast: A New Beginning both saw positive reception from users, but a mixed reception from critics, and ultimately performed below management expectations. However, it also pointed out that Star Wars Battlefront Classic Collection and South Park Snow Day, quote, delivered within expectations, but despite both of those seeing mixed reception from players and critics. That South Park Snow Day is apparently not very good, and that Star Wars Battlefront Classic Collection was a hot mess when it came out. A hot enough mess to make even Helldivers 2 blush, at least at launch. Meanwhile, the only success that they saw was the Tomb Raider 1 and 3 Remastered Collection, which was positively received and performed above management expectations. God, I just can't imagine trying to play those old Tomb Raider games. I really can't. They have aged like milk in a global, in like, if you put out milk in fucking Phoenix, Arizona on the hottest day of the year and then came back to it like 9 years later, that is how I would describe those original Tomb Raider games. Go play the reboot, or go play the reboot trilogy. If you're gonna play Tomb Raider, don't fucking bother with those other games. They're not good. That being said, turns out Embracer Group not selling a lot of games, and you can kind of see why. I mean, the Alone in the Dark game had been delayed for a very, very long time, and I think you lose a lot of public interest, even on a franchise like Alone in the Dark, when the game continues to be delayed. South Park Snow Day was not very good. Star Wars Battlefront Classic Collection was a hot mess. And again, I just talked about what happened with Outcast. So you can see why maybe they didn't sell as well. But maybe with the new reorganization between their big three companies now, this stuff is less likely to happen going forward. Wait a minute, what year is this? Hold on, hold on, I'm just talking to my producer. Producer, can I get today's newspaper, a calendar, and can I get a clock so I can figure out what time it is? Because when I read this news story, I am going like way back in time. I said that people that know the game Outcast are older than dirt. The people that know these two brands have got to be in the fucking old folks home at this point. Let me read you the headline. Atari has acquired the Intellivision brand, ending the first ever console war. Oh shit. Okay, sure. I woke up to this morning and I was like, fuck, I hope I wasn't sleeping for that long. God damn. But yeah, Atari has now acquired the Intellivision brand. A rebranded Intellivision LLC will continue working on what? Oh, I have not had a chance to actually read this news story since it came out. So we're going to read this news story together. A rebranded Intellivision LLC will continue working on the Amico console. They're going to keep working on that. We're going to get to the Amico console in a moment, but oh my God, this is wow. All right, buckle up. Atari has acquired the Intellivision brand, effectively ending the first console rivalry dating back to the 1970s. The 1970s, during the Black Ops Cold War time or whatever. Atari announced today that it acquired the Intellivision brand and certain games from the Intellivision Entertainment LLC, which has been working on the Amico console for a number of years. For context, the Amico console has been a failed console that Intellivision has tried to launch for years now. For years, and it's been an absolute disaster, never seeing the light of day. I don't know if Atari are the people to make it happen, but I digress. The deal, however, will not include the Amico. Instead, Intellivision Entertainment LLC will continue as a separate rebranded company and will continue working on the Amico using a license from Atari to release Intellivision games on it. Okay, hold on. The deal will not, however, include the Amico. Instead, Intellivision Entertainment LLC will continue as a separate rebranded company and will continue working on the Amico using a license from Atari to release Intellivision games on it. I guess this means that Atari knew better. Atari knew better than to buy the Amico, and that the people still working on the Intellivision Amico will get a stipend of cash from this brand deal as part of the licensing agreement, assuming this Amico console ever sees the light of day. The Intellivision was released by Mattel in 1979 and was responsible for starting the first ever video game console war, going head-to-head against the Atari VCS, which was later renamed the Atari 2600. Now that both brands are under the same company, the rivalry is essentially over. Mike Micah put out a statement saying, uniting Atari and Intellivision after 45 years ends the longest running console war in history. Atari CEO and chairman Wade Rosen added, this was a very rare opportunity to unite former competitors and bring together fans of Atari, Intellivision, and the golden age of gaming. The acquisition means Atari now owns the rights to more than 200 titles from Intellivision's portfolio, as well as Intellivision branding and trademarks. The company has already started taking advantage of this acquisition by adding Intellivision branded items to the Atari online store. Well, fuck me. Can I get an Intellivision hat? Well, Atari merch store. Sorry, this is hard-hitting journalism, if you don't mind me. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I get it. Okay. All right, hold on. If I want to be the coolest cat in town, and oh, you know what? Those Atari t-shirts are not too bad, actually. Real talk, those Atari t-shirts are not too bad. But can I sort by brand? I just want Intellivision. Wait a minute. Okay, there's a category on the Atari website that just says supplements. And I'm like, oh, fuck yeah. Give me those goddamn Atari supplements. Anyways, it's just like a energy drink thing, which is a generous way to describe what supplements are. All right, what do we got here? Ooh, okay, you can get a candle. You can get an Atari scented candle. That sounds like fun. What's not to like about that? But really, when it comes to the kind of Intellivision, like there's a shirt that says Intellivision on it. It's $28. I don't know if that's American or Canadian, but they were really smart enough to be like, well, we should probably sell a shirt that says Intellivision on it. Not that I would buy it, but you know, it's an option for people that do. Got some sweet skateboarding shoes on here. Oh, they still sell the speaker hat. Oh, it's US exclusive, damn it. So Atari used to sell these hats that had a Bluetooth speaker built into the brim of the hat, so you could blast music from that speaker hat wherever you went. And it was really dumb. You can get a Pong gaming jersey. Okay, yeah. As someone who's single, and I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm a gentleman who is currently single. I feel like purchasing clothing merchandise from the good folks at Atari would just make my singleness worse. But you know what? If I came across a lovely lady that saw my Intellivision shirt and said, I fucking love Intellivision, I would be like, shit, I wish Atari sold wedding rings on their merch store because you are the one for me. Anyways, it's fucking... Hey, listen, this is huge news. I should have made this the top news story. But here we are. Intellivision Entertainment CEO Phil Adams said Atari has been a valuable partner, and we have every confidence that this will be a responsible steward of the storied Intellivision brand. We look forward to our expanded collaboration and bringing a broad array of new Atari and Intellivision titles to the Amico and Amico Home family gaming platforms. Here's what you need to know. The Amico system was originally due to launch in October of 2020, but the COVID-19 pandemic pushed this back to April of 2021, and then again to fall of 2021. The company even started selling 8 of its boxed launch games in October of 2021, despite the console not yet having a release date, so you could buy games for a console that did not come out. Recently, Intellivision released the Amico Home, an attempt to bring the Amico console experience to mobile without having the release of the hardware. The Amico Home is available on Android with an iOS version to follow. However, according to today's news, the company, which will now rebrand following the Atari acquisition, claims the Amico console is, quote, still under development. That console is never coming out. If I can give you some homework, go read up on the history of the Intellivision Amico. It is a wild story. we're going to take a quick break. We come back, we have some Multiversus news stories to talk about. In case you're wondering where Jason Voorhees is going to pop up next, we will cover that, plus some Nintendo acquisition news, some games media news, Redfall news, and so much more. Stick around. We will be right back. Welcome back to the show. I continue to be GnittWitt. I'm here. I have returned to the plane of existence that is this podcast to bring you news about Multiversus. You know, Multiversus is gearing back up for its relaunch after being, you know, offline for like a year almost, which is really crazy to think about. I don't think it's out quite yet. May 28th. God, that's soon. But last week we had this breaking news where somebody got the idea that they're just going to put Jason in a bunch of Jason Voorhees, my friend Jason, my good friend Jason, in a bunch. They're just like, we're gonna do stuff with Jason. we're gonna you know, perhaps I used the word whoring out Jason, which is maybe strong. It's a little negative, but you know, they're going to put Jason out on, you know, things and games and whatnot. And it's now been confirmed that Jason Voorhees is coming to Multiversus. So you can play. So here, I'm just going to name you some of the games. Sorry, some of the characters that are going to be in Multiversus. And you tell me what you think about all this, because it's sounding fucking wilder and wilder as the game gets developed. We now have Bugs Bunny, Batman, Arya Stark from Game of Thrones, Rick Sanchez, that is from Rick and Morty. You got Velma, you got Shaggy, you got Batman, you got Superman, you got Agent Smith. As part of this announcement, they also confirmed that Agent Smith from The Matrix is going to be in it, and Jason Voorhees will be a playable character in the fighting game, and it's just so wacky and wild that I cannot wait to play the reboot of this game and see how it goes. I briefly played it for some time when it originally came out, but I have not played much of it, and I'll be curious to see what this reboot works out to be when it drops May 28th. I'm assuming Jason Voorhees costs some money. That's just my assumption, but what the hell do I know? We're going to move on to more news stories here. Nintendo has purchased the Hogwarts Legacy and Mortal Kombat Switch port developer Shiver Entertainment from Embracer Group. So here's what you need to know is when companies put out games, sometimes those original developers are not the same people that eventually bring those games to other platforms. A great example is the people that make games like The Witcher 3 or Doom Eternal or Mortal Kombat 1 or 11 or Hogwarts Legacy were not the same people who would eventually port that game over to something like the Nintendo Switch. One of the most prominent Switch port studios being Shiver Entertainment, who were working under Embracer Group, who have now been purchased for 100% of the company's outstanding shares and made a wholly owned subsidiary of Nintendo. Now, one of the interesting things about Nintendo is that they're not, as of right now, changing the way that this stuff works for Shiver Entertainment, meaning that Shiver Entertainment is going to continue to port those games to Switch, but may also be porting games to other consoles as well. Since its establishment in 2012, Shiver has worked on porting and developing software such as Hogwarts Legacy and Mortal Kombat 1 to Nintendo Switch. Statement says, by welcoming Shiver's experience and accomplished development team, Nintendo aims to secure high-level resources for porting and developing software titles. Doesn't necessarily specify if it's going to continue to be Switch or not, but I have some thoughts, and we'll share those thoughts in a moment. Going forward, even after it becomes a part of Nintendo Group, Shiver's focus will remain the same, continuing commissions that port and develop software for multiple platforms, including Nintendo Switch. So Nintendo now having a developer that may not necessarily be just working on Switch games, right? But I think there's more to it. I think especially as Nintendo gears up for a Switch 2 release, there will probably be an increase in, you know, PS4 and potentially even PS5 and Xbox One games and Xbox Series X games being ported to Nintendo Switch. This is what I suspect is going to happen. I mean, they just put out, what was it, that Batman Arkham collection on Switch not that long ago, right? Like, you know, Mortal Kombat 1 is a pretty recent game that came out on PS5 and Switch, right? Despite, you know, the Switch, you know, barely being as powerful as a PS4, right? So when you think about it like that, I think Nintendo probably needs people who are an expert in their architecture, in their hardware, even if the hardware grows to be more powerful, that can port something like, I don't know, Cyberpunk 2077, just an example, onto something like the Switch 2, right? I'm not saying by no means that the Switch 2 is going to be the place to play Cyberpunk 2077, nor is the Switch 1 the place to play The Witcher 3, but if it works out for you, fine, more power to you. But you can see a scenario where it's like, especially when third-party companies, EA, Activision, Microsoft, Ubisoft, maybe haven't been that interested in making more Switch games. If Nintendo can say, hey, we actually have people, just give them your game and they will put it out on Switch, and you just kind of reap the benefits and the rewards, that might actually work out for everybody. But we'll see how that goes. This buyout represents the first acquisition since the 2022 purchase of Dynamo Pictures and SRD by Nintendo. Before that, the company's last acquisition was Next Level Games in 2021 and Monolith Software, the people that made Xenoblade, in 2007. Shiver joins Next Level, the developer of Luigi's Mansion 3, and Retro Studios, the developer of Metroid Prime and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, in Nintendo's roster of North American studios. So not a lot of North American studios owned by Nintendo, but I think we can all recognize that a lot of the Nintendo magic does come from Japan, which is different than the way Sony operates, where we used to think a lot of the magic from Sony also came from Japan, but they've become such a Euro-focused and North American-focused company, PlayStation has anyways, that we don't quite see a lot of output from Japan anymore. So if you listen to this podcast, there's a very good chance that you listen to other gaming podcasts. And if you listen to other gaming podcasts, there is a good chance that you get your gaming news from other sources, up to and including video game news sites like Eurogamer and GameIndustry.biz. We've talked about GameIndustry.biz in the past. And you might even get your news sources from news from sites like IGN or GameSpot or Game Informer, so on and so forth. IGN, probably the biggest gaming news kind of conglomerate out there, owned by Ziff Davis. And it's now been announced that the UK-based media company Gamer Network, which includes sites like Eurogamer and GameIndustry.biz, will be acquired by IGN. Of course, IGN owned by Ziff Davis. They just call it IGN Entertainment now. Really, Ziff Davis doesn't have much to do with it. But the UK-based games media company has been acquired for an unknown sum of money from ReedPop, the PAX and New York Comic Con organizer, which acquired it back in 2018. So what you need to know is that ReedPop, the company that produces PAX and New York Comic Con, they are really in the business of live pop culture nerd events. I just don't like saying nerd events. Because every time I say the word nerd event, I can smell what a nerd event probably smells like, and it ain't pretty. And that smell ain't coming from me. It's coming from my imagination. Point is, ReedPop was in the business of PAX and New York Comic Con. Eurogamer also would produce some Euro-centric game events as well. But now ReedPop is just trying to focus on those live events and less to do with media and news. And that's why they've sold off Eurogamer and GameIndustry.biz, as well as a couple other companies, to IGN. The news was shared on Tuesday alongside confirmation that the acquisition would result in redundancies across the organization. Events such as EGX and MCM will remain with ReedPop. So they're going to continue to produce those events that used to be under their banner as well. The Gamers Network publication includes GameIndustry.biz, Eurogamer, Rock Paper Shotgun, VG247, and Dicebreaker. The business also holds shares in Outside Xbox, Digital Foundry, and Hookshot, which operates Nintendo Life Push Square, Pure Xbox, and Time Extension. Gamer Network is also the commercial partner for Video Games Chronicles, so basically Video Games Chronicles has a working agreement with Gamer Network, I believe, for ads, but Gamer Network does not actually own Gamer Network does not actually own Video Games Chronicles. IGN is a division of Ziff Davis, which also includes IGN, Map Genie, How Long to Beat, and Humble Bundle. So that IGN conglomerate just keeps on growing. I know that Brendan Sinclair, who's a terrific video game journalist, just one of probably the best video game journalist out there, in my opinion, was also let go as part of this. I wish everybody, including Brendan, I know there was also some people at Rock Paper Shotgun who were let go as part of this. I hope that everybody lands on their feet, and I hope that, you know, though I see a lot of value in stuff like GameIndustry.biz, because I think GameIndustry.biz is needed to provide video game news to people working within the industry, whereas I think there's value in stuff like IGN providing news to people who play games. I think there needs to be like a industry-focused news source, and I hope the game industry continues to get that support as they now become owned by IGN. Redfall. Remember Redfall? Redfall is getting its final update. I know there was thoughts like, oh, it's not going to happen. It's all this craziness. It's done. It's done. No, Redfall is getting its final update, including offline play. It has also been including, it's going to also include a revamped neighborhood system and nest system, as well as single player pausing, because when you played the game, it was online only. And if you paused the game wouldn't actually pause because you were online, which meant you had to go run and hide somewhere and hope the enemies didn't find you while you were cooking chicken wings while going to the bathroom, or whatever it is that people do when they pause their video game. This is going against the suggestion that the update wouldn't be released after Microsoft had announced plans to cut and close the studio. However, we don't know when this update is going to come out, but this will be update 4 for the game and will be its final update. Curious to see how that goes. It could be big, it could be small. I don't know. I will reinstall. I'll reinstall Redfall. I'll do it. I'll reinstall it. I'll download it. When that update comes out, I will download it. I will play Redfall, and I will tell you, listen, I was there when it came out. Okay. I was there at the beginning, and then I beat it, and then I stopped playing it, but I'll be there in the end to see what Redfall is like with that final update. So if you're curious to know how that works out, you just wait till that update comes out, and I'll tell you all about it. Other game companies have been announcing their Summer Game Fest or Summer Game Fest adjacent events. One of my favorite publishers is Devolver Digital. I think they put out some terrific indie games, and they just have a weird style and sense of humor. And if you didn't watch their last year's event, that's a shame. I'm sure this event will be very exciting. Indie publisher Devolver Digital has announced its summer showcase. They advise you to tune in for, quote, totally normal festivities, which is going to be happening Saturday, June 8th. I'm getting this from Eurogamer, so they say 1 a.m. UK time. I don't know what that means. What is that in UK time to PST? London time to PST. Oh, what is this website? What is this website? Okay, so that's about 5 p.m. June 8th for those living on the West Coast, the best coast. Anyways, looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to Summer Game Fest. Very exciting. Very excited. Oh, I should have actually read the website. It says June 7th, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Great. That's on a Friday. Friday, 5 p.m. I'll be there. Maybe you will be as well. How much more news? Oh, this is interesting. So I don't often, look for studies and things like that as it pertains to the video game industry. It's really hard to get a sense of some of the science behind the studying that goes on. But I found this really interesting. I'd like to share this with you. This is our last news story, and then we'll move on. I know these podcasts have gotten longer and longer over the last couple of episodes. I hope you enjoy them. I hope it provides value to you. I hope they're not too long, but I find this really interesting. I'd like to share this with you. This is from IGN. This is a report on a a study that was done by Quantic Foundry, saying that gamers are becoming less interested in games with deep strategy. This is a study. The report from Quantic Foundry collected 9 years of data from the researcher's own gamer motivation profile tool, which tracks how appealing different aspects of games are to different people. These categories include destruction, excitement, competition, community challenge, strategy, completion, power, fantasy, story, discovery, and design. Quantic Foundry looked back on what's motivated gamers across the years and found all of these have remained relatively consistent except for one: strategy. Gamers who score high in this component enjoy games that require careful decision making and planning. They like to think through their options and likely outcomes. These may be decisions related to balancing resources and completing goals, managing foreign diplomacy, or finding optimal long-term strategies. They tend to enjoy both the tactical games. They tend to enjoy both the tactical combat in games like XCOM or Fire Emblem, as well as seeing their carefully devised plans come to fruition in games like Civilization, City Skylines, or Europa Universalis. But across its 1.7 million surveys, Quantic Foundry found that 2/3 of strategy fans worldwide, except in China, where gamers have a very different gaming motivation profile, have lost interest in this element of strategy in video games. 67% of gamers today care less about strategic thinking and planning when playing games than the average gamer back in June of 2015. The report reads, quote, "When we looked for long-term trends across the 12 motivations, we found that many motivations were stable or experienced minor deviations over the past 9 years. This is what Quantic Foundry said. Quote, "Strategy was the clear exception. It has substantially declined over the past 9 years, and the magnitude of this change was more than twice the size of the next largest change. The trend was analyzed, but Quantic Foundry couldn't find any distinct separation between, for example, men and women or gamers based in and out of the US. It was likened to other trends related to a decrease in attention span, like shorter YouTube videos now generating more views and shorter lengths of time between cuts in films, but Quantic Foundry admitted it's difficult to pin down the cause and effect and said there's a lack of evidence to solely blame social media as many do." I guess the idea being that we have shorter attention spans and therefore it's tougher for gamers to think, like 2 or 3 moves ahead. So I'll say this and we're going to continue on in a moment. When I play tactical strategy games like XCOM, I tend to play them on the easiest difficulty. Now, one of the things about XCOM, which is unique about XCOM and other games like it, is that when it's a turn-based, tactical strategy game, right? So in XCOM, you have your squad of, say 5, soldiers, and you are moving across the battlefield in turns, to take on enemy, aliens and things like that, right? Sometimes you are moving characters into parts of the battlefield where you don't know until you get there what the state of the world is going to look like. Sometimes you're aiming at different enemies with a different percentage chance of hitting them and things like that. And one of the things that can happen in XCOM is that if your soldier is shot in the game during one of the missions, if you do not get to them in time by, say, one of your characters being a medic or, something like that, if a soldier dies in XCOM, there is the option for that soldier to be permanently killed and completely removed from your squad of players, meaning you're going to need to add somebody else to the team who may be weaker, may not be as experienced of a soldier. So there's kind of this risk reward of like, the more I bring in my sniper into these missions, the better my sniper will be. But if my sniper dies, I have to do this all over again with somebody else, replace them with somebody else in the squad. Maybe I'm going to replace them with a medic because now I realize that my team doesn't have the medical resources to survive these missions, so on and so forth. So for me, like, I actually really like that risk of like, oh man, my sniper has been with me for 7 missions and then they got fucking blown away by some tank, alien tank or whatever. And I really like that risk, right? But I don't want the game to be incredibly difficult, so I tend to play it on the easiest setting with the permanent death option turned on. The idea being that, like, I recognize that I may not have the best strategy when it comes to approaching these missions. I may not be thinking as tactically as I maybe should be. I might be running and gunning and trying to John Rambo my way through a lot of these missions, but I don't want to be punished too greatly for being stupid when it comes to thinking strategically, but I'm willing to accept the consequences if something catastrophic were to happen. So in a game like XCOM, I know they also reference Fire Emblem, I tend to be somebody who will play it on easy, but is more than willing to accept the consequences of my actions should I make a mistake. I don't often think about a game like City Skyline as being a strategy game. When I think strategy games, I think games that often involve, diplomacy and military, and tactical combat, turn-based action, things like that. But I guess you could call City Skylines kind of a strategy game. It's just that the strategy is such a long-term thing, right? You're not, you're in a way you're thinking in terms of like, well, I just need more zoning in the commercial district because not enough people have jobs, right? Or I don't have enough people for the businesses that are looking for customers or whatever the case may be, right? I'm not thinking like, if I move this guy to this position, this sniper is going to be able to see them and then potentially kill them or whatever the case may be. I'm thinking in terms of like, taxes are crazy, but I guess you could call City Skylines a strategy game. So when I think that, I don't think about it in terms of like, oh, I like social media and that's made it difficult for me to engage in strategy games. I think the reason why I don't often engage in strategy games is because I like beating games. Like first of all, I cannot stress enough how few people beat the games that they play in this day and age. Like, people are beating fewer and fewer games as the years going on because of things like difficulty and in terms of games, like in terms of things like boss battles, in terms of things like, I got lost, I don't know where to go, I don't know how to solve this puzzle, whatever the case may be. Even though there are tools and resources like social media, YouTube, you name it, to help with them, at some point people are just like, fuck it, I don't want to spend the next hour, banging my head against a boss battle. I don't want to spend the next 2 days trying to figure out what this puzzle is. Like, fuck that, I'm just going to move on. And if I move on, I move on. And I'm definitely someone who thinks like that. But when it comes to a strategy game, like, I want to beat the strategy game. I want to finish it. So as a result, I may not be thinking as strategically as I should be because I'm not engaging with that part of my brain. But I would argue that a lot of that has to come down to people's inability to beat games or people's desire to move on when a game gets too difficult. I would argue it doesn't have as much to do with social media, or not directly. It's this idea that like everything is competing for your time, and if you can find something that engages with you on a more on a deeper level or a more exciting level, that may not be a strategy game where you're like, I keep banging my head against this combat encounter, I don't know which chess pieces I need to move to beat it accordingly, or I've made so many poor choices leading up to this point that it's actually impossible to get through this battle now, and I'm just going to lose, and I don't want to lose because losing is not fun. It's not the idea that people want to always win. It's not the idea that people want fucking participation awards. It's just that literally everything is competing for your time, right? Like, maybe that's why people don't go on and play the Fallout game, because they're like, fuck it, I don't want to spend 30 hours looking at a Pip-Boy trying to figure out which weapon I need to bring into this combat encounter, like, or which, armor to wear. Like, I'd rather just watch the show and then move on to something else. Like, there's always that possibility. I just don't know if social media is to blame when it comes to this. But if we continue on, the likes of Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok and other social media apps could have, quote, accelerated the underlying trend. However, another potential hypothesis is that the increasingly negativity, polarization, intrusiveness, and emotional manipulation in social media has created a persistent cognitive overload on the finite cognitive resources we have. To put simply, we may be too worn out by social media to think deeply about things. I guess that's possible. Regardless of the cause, Quantic Foundry said, it's clear that gamers have become less interested in strategic thinking over the past 9 years. which implies the gamers are now more easily cognitively overloaded when they play games and are more likely to avoid strategic complexity. Which I've even seen that in games that offer a lot of different approaches to combat. Like I think about, I don't know, a Tom Clancy game like Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon, or Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands or Breakpoint, right? The idea is that, like, okay, this is a shooter. I'm going to shoot dude in the face, but I'm now approaching this enemy base, and I don't know how I'm going to do it, right? Am I going to try to run and gun, walk through the front door, guns blazing? Am I going to try to sneak into the base and take out people at a very close range so that I can hide their body from enemies? Am I going to try to take out the lookouts first so that I can shoot other people safely from a distance without lookouts spotting me? And am I going to send my drone in to, do whatever? And this also applies to stuff like Assassin's Creed and even Ghost of Tsushima to some extent, of like, how do I want to approach this combat encounter, right? Which is obviously less strategically dense than something like a traditional strategy game. But I've often thought that, like, a lot of these action games, a lot of these action RPGs or shooters or whatever, have opened up the approach to how you engage with combat to offer some level of strategic complexity. Not obviously not to the extent of something like XCOM or, Civilization, but if you want to think, you now can, which is not something that used to be the case in games like, Assassin's Creed to some extent. This trend, I'm going to continue on with the news story. This trend may even affect how developers create and market games, though there are still plenty of strategy titles. There are still plenty of strategy titles coming out. Capes, which is a gritty turn-based strategy role-playing game about villains ruling the streets, and a new batch of superheroes having to rise up, launches in just 1 week on May 29th. Firaxis, the people that made XCOM and Marvel's Midnight Suns, are also still developing a new Civilization game, though no word on release date. And a team of former Blizzard developers are working on Stormgate, which is a real-time strategy game set in a post-apocalyptic future, due out in the third quarter of 2024. For those that are like listening to this and being like, okay, well, like, I want to get into strategy games. Like, what strategy games should I get into? Can I just, if you don't mind, let me just toss a couple on your radar, if that is okay. First and foremost, I think XCOM is a fantastic series. I think you should definitely check out XCOM if you haven't had the chance to do so. I mean, Settlers also came on a Game Pass. Settlers is a strategy game. Stranded Alien Dawn is a strategy game. But if I look at the other games, where is the Sony All Games? If you want to get into strategy games, I think XCOM is a fantastic choice. I think XCOM 2 is a tremendous game. Just play it on easy so you can wrap your mind around some of the strategy involved. I would say turn on the permadeath difficulty so at least feel emotionally invested in some of the characters that you're working with. And I would say give those a shot. There's also a couple of Warhammer games on PlayStation Plus. Like, there's plenty of strategy games. Worms, I love Worms. Worms, actually, you should play Worms. Worms is good. Worms is a good entry level strategy game if that is your thing. But anyways, that was kind of it for that kind of news story as it relates to people maybe being less interested in strategy games. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, we're going to talk Diablo 4 Loot Reborn. We are going to talk Ghost of Tsushima, and then the games that I want to play next week. Stick around. We will be right back. Welcome back to the podcast. I continue to be GnittWitt, and we're here to talk about the games that I have been playing now that we've got news out of the way. Mostly it has been Diablo 4 Loot Reborn and Ghost of Tsushima. Let's kind of get Diablo 4 out of the way now, because it is an old game that I continue to play. When they put out this Loot Reborn update, I think the idea behind it was that when you fought enemies, you would get less equipment over time, but each, new equipment would be more valuable. more valuable in the sense that you know, the changes that you could, the perks and bonuses you got at, let's say you got a helmet, right? The perks and bonuses you'd get out of that new helmet would be significant, much more significant than the past, but also cleaner and clearer, you know, kind of breakdown on what changes would apply to your characters. The idea being that if, you know, I was playing as a sorcerer when I stopped playing Diablo 4, and I was a sorcerer that primarily focused on electricity and lightning and crackling damage and all that stuff. Because when I went to YouTube or the social, you know, Google, and I was like, what's the best character, what's the best skills and abilities I should be using for my sorcerer? At the time, that was what the, you know, kind of the consensus was, like, hey, the lightning and crackling, you know, electricity spells in Diablo 4 are going to be the best ones for your character. Those are what you should be playing as, or what you should be using. But since that update, I started getting a lot more, you know, loot items, you know, boots and shoulder pads and, you know, whips, wands and staves and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, these seem like significant perks and bonuses for skills and abilities that I'm not currently using. What if I switch to those skills and abilities? Would I get a more powerful character? Because all of a sudden, even though I'm not familiar with the way these abilities and attacks and upgrades work, they seem like higher numbers. They seem more, you know, substantial than what I currently have. So as a result, I ended up switching from being a primarily electricity focused character to now primarily a fire focused character, with the ability to summon these Hydra like dragons out of the ground that target and attack my enemies for me. So it's almost a scenario now where it's like I can now have, because fire is going to deal damage over a period of time for these enemies, and because I have these Hydra dragons that I can spawn 2 sets of them on the in the combat to attack for me, it's now a scenario where like my enemies are dying, are pretty much melting in front of me, because it's a scenario where I can spawn the Hydra dragons. They start doing a bunch of damage. That damage then gets added over time as it slowly drains the enemy's health by burning them. So when I finally get around to, so, you know, hitting them up for their, you know, with my own attacks, I have like a flamethrower that I can just hold down and it just like casts a bunch of like flame, like basically a flamethrower in front of them, in front of the enemies. I am melting these enemies in a way that I felt like I wasn't during my time focusing on electricity. That isn't to say that, you know, if I switch back to electricity, I couldn't find some interesting upgrades and stuff like that. But I feel like the loot in Diablo 4, while there's a lot less of it, it feels a lot more meaningful, and it's allowed me to more creatively approach the type of character I want to be. I use the sorcerer as an example because that's my main character, is like a level 72, 73 sorcerer. And I just feel like it's kind of totally opened up the game for me in terms of, you know, reapplying my skill upgrade points, ability points, and all that stuff. And I feel like I'm finally experimenting and playing the game the way I want to. And it does lead me to consider the idea of like, well, what if I do start a new character? What if I become what if I actually spend some time as a barbarian or as a rogue, right? Like, what are those, you know, the rogue shoots with a bow and attacks with daggers? Like, what does that stuff look like now in the context of, you know, significantly cleaner and clearer delineations on what you get from those, you know, bows that you pick up on the ground, the new helmets you get, the ability points you get. Like, it just feels like it's kind of opened up the game for me in a way that I am just a lot more interested in. It's unfortunate that it has come out at a time when there are so many other games I could and should be playing. But I've really enjoyed my time with it. I think the thing I would say about Diablo 4 now is that this update that they put out is the first time I feel like the game is actually in a better place since launch, right? I feel like it is significantly improved upon in a way that it hasn't been for almost the year since it came out. So I'm pretty happy about where Diablo 4 is at. However, I just don't know if I can excite people, you know, in terms of what Diablo 4 is now, with this update. I feel like this update is actually for people who have spent a lot of time with the game and were getting tired of it, getting kind of bored with it. I feel like this has brought me back as a lapsed player, but like, are people who haven't played the game at all going to notice or going to care? I think that's the thing, right? Is like, when we look at games that have this, this track record of update after update after update, the question, and this is something that Destiny has struggled with, things like World of Warcraft and Call of Duty and all this stuff has struggled with, is like, or games in general that have had these long running updates. Call of Duty being an exception because there's a game that comes out every year, but like, when a company invests in putting out a big update for a game, who is this update for, right? Who is the update for? Because I would argue that developing an update for a game that is meant to attract new players versus an update that is designed to bring back old players or further engage old players that are already playing the game, I think are two very, very different things, right? You think about the Fallout 4 update, right? On paper, when I look at the Fallout 4 update, to me, that is an update that is designed to bring in new players to the game because it's finally available on something like a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X and S, right? It's timed with the release of the TV show update. And also, how many people were still playing Fallout 4, a game that's damn near 10 years old, right? I think the idea was to get some more sales of the game, get more people into it than maybe had been in the past, right? I think in the case of the Fallout 76 update, I think they were really trying to focus on both engaging with new players that could be attracted from the show, as well as keeping the old fans of the game happy as well. And I think with Diablo 4, I think on paper, it's an update that should appeal to everybody. And I think it allows me to better recommend a game like Diablo 4, especially because it's on Game Pass, right? Like I've talked to friends who have Game Pass and been like, hey man, there's never been a better time to play Diablo 4. And I know that sounds like I'm marketing for the game, but like, that's how I feel. If you're going to play it, now's the time, right? However, are they going to notice that the loot is less plentiful, but more engaging? I don't know. They would have to play and see for themselves. But in general, I am pretty happy with Diablo 4. I don't think I'm going to have much more to say about Diablo 4, regardless of whether I play more of it or not. I just want to come out here and say that, like, I think Diablo 4 had a bit of a rocky launch. It's had a weird go at it since launch, and I would argue that there's never been a better time to get into Diablo 4. Let's talk Ghost of Tsushima. So, Ghost of Tsushima originally came out on PlayStation 4. They made by Sucker Punch, the people that did Infamous, as well as the people that did Sly Cooper. Love me some Sly Cooper. I love me some Infamous. Both fantastic series that we will probably never see again because Sony's not interested in, bringing back old franchises. But that's neither here nor there. Ghost of Tsushima is an open world action game. The premise for it is that you are playing as this character Jin Sakai, who is kind of a member of the Japanese royalty during the late 1200s in Japan during the Mongol invasion. The game opens with the Mongols have already invaded Japan and have slaughtered pretty much all of the samurai, and you are one of the last remaining members of the samurai, tasked with rescuing your uncle who has been taken capture by the Mongols. A game starts out, in terms of getting the basic premise up to speed, it's pretty quick in terms of like, okay, you're this guy, you got to go kill the Mongols. It's kind of a revenge story type thing. Away you go, right? But in terms of actually getting the story up and running, in terms of interesting characters, side characters, motivations, who Jin is, why things are the way they are, I find it to be a pretty slow opening, especially for an open world game. Now, when I talk about an open world game being slow, because I said the same thing about, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I said the same thing about Horizon Forbidden West. When I say it's a slow, kind of open for an open world game, I'm not necessarily talking about, at least in the case of Ghost of Tsushima, I'm not necessarily talking about, its ability to get you into the open world and let you run around and engage in side content, collectibles, whatever. I'm merely talking about the way the story slowly unravels itself, right? In the case of something like Horizon Forbidden West, it literally opens slowly. Like, it is a lot of you going through a very narrow kind of scripted story segments and moments until you literally walk through a gate in that game after doing a bunch of story missions, and then you get to see the real open world, right? I would say similar with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. It opens up in a very, very slow way until you can finally explore England and the larger open world. That's not necessarily the case in Ghost of Tsushima. Instead, what it feels like is like the meat of that story is just very slow at revealing itself. So I think that is an interesting dilemma. I'm going to get to if I like the game or not in a moment, but think about it like this. If the game opens pretty quickly in terms of setting up premise and story and is very quick to let you run around in the open world, how do you engage with the game? My initial thought was, well, I'm going to run around and do a bunch of side quests and find a bunch of collectibles and do all that stuff because that'll make, doing the story missions easier. And I'm about, I don't know if I'd have to pull up my Steam playthrough so far. I'm about 13 hours into Ghost of Tsushima. And I would say that engaging with all that side content and running around the open world immediately is not the right way to play that game, because I have found myself being far too powerful and over leveled for a lot of the story missions that I found. I've just been able to walk through a lot of the story missions with ease. And the concern is that, like, you would eventually get burnt out of the game before the story's over, and then you're just grinding through the story missions because you spent 70 hours, doing collectibles and other story stuff, or other side stuff. So I think while I recognize that the game is pretty quick and reasonable in terms of getting me into the open world, I would argue that you're actually better off focusing on the story, at least for the time being, until you feel like you're either done with the story and you go back to the open world to clean up the side stuff that you haven't done, or if you're like, okay, this is like, I've pretty much done almost everything in the story, but I want to go take my time now with the side content. So first and foremost, I found myself kind of hitting a wall with the side content, not because it's bad, but because it actively got in the way of me getting a better understanding of the characters in the story and the world in general. So going forward, I think I'm going to spend a little bit more time with the story missions before I go back to the side stuff. In terms of what that game is, it is an open world action game heavily inspired by things like Assassin's Creed. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think when people compare games to each other, they often do it disparagingly. I think they often do it as an insult. I don't like comparing games to each other, only because if you haven't played the game I'm comparing it to, you're not going to know what I'm talking about at all, right? People compare Animal Well with, listening to the All Elite podcast, people talking about Animal Well, and they keep referring to it as a Metroidvania. Well, the problem is that if you've never played a Metroid game, or if you don't know what some of the Castlevania games turned into since the original Nintendo release, you're not going to have a damn clue what that means. What is Animal Well? It is a side-scrolling kind of puzzle platforming kind of adventure game type thing, right? Which means that you're going to find items that open doors that you couldn't previously get into and all of that stuff. But if you haven't played Metroid or Castlevania, you're not going to know what I'm talking about. So if you've never played an Assassin's Creed game, or if you have and you don't know the difference between Assassin's Creed 2 and 3 and 4 versus Assassin's Creed, Valhalla or Origins, you're going to be like, well, is it an RPG? Is it not? And I would say this, I think, more closely aligns with original Assassin's Creed in terms of it's a much smaller scope of a world. There's not a lot of loot and items to pick up, but you do have plenty of abilities and options at your disposal for taking out enemies. So I'll give you an example. You have one sword in Ghost of Tsushima. You can upgrade that sword with materials and items you find in the world, but you're not picking up zillions of different swords, right? You unlock new abilities and items, both through the story and through leveling up the character. You're not finding a lot of shit in the open world. The only thing you really find in the open world are materials for upgrading things like your armor, which I will say they do have an emphasis on customizing your character. So there are different masks and headwear and armor sets to wear. And when you find armor, you can't upgrade that armor, but it's not like a Diablo. It's not like an Assassin's Creed Origins or anything like that. In terms of like, I found 7 different swords. Like, you have 1 sword. That's it. Right. So when I say Assassin's Creed, I mean like you can, stealthily approach characters and assassinate them silently. You can take them out with your bow and arrow. There's kunai that you can throw as kind of like a one-hit kill instantly for a lot of enemies. So there are enemies that are much bigger and stronger. So when you engage with the combat, it tries its best to root its combat in, the art of swordplay, the art of blocking and parrying and dashing appropriately with something like a samurai sword. And I say that because you don't have a lot of health. Like, when you get cut up by an enemy, you get cut up and get killed pretty quickly, at least on normal difficulty, I found, and in the early goings. But that also means that it doesn't take a lot of hits for you to take out an enemy. There are enemies with much more armor and shields and stuff like that, and that you have to kind of get through first. But samurai swords are sharp, dog. So when you cut up someone, you cut them up pretty quickly. So I think that adds a decent layer of risk and reward to the combat of like, okay, I was able to parry, and now this guy is opened up for an attack because he's, staggered from the block. And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to punish him and I'm going to cut him up. Or, oh, this guy has a shield, so I'm going to use heavy attacks to kind of break through that guard, and then quick attacks to open him up now that he has broken his defenses. There is a good balance between, enemies in a defensive stance and you need to break that guard to get into their vulnerable state, and like rolling around, dodging and letting them kind of tire themselves out before you can finish them off. I would say it's a balance between something like a Sekiro or a and I know I hate necessarily comparing games, but I would say it's kind of like that Souls like risk and reward of like, I need to block appropriately, I need to dodge appropriately, I need to think somewhat strategically about these attacks, because if I get got, I'm gonna have to redo this, and it's not gonna take much hits for the enemy to punish me and kill me. And that approach of like, I'm just going to sneak into a base, cut everybody up. They're not going to see me. I'm going to throw my ninja stars, do all that stuff. Now you might be wondering, well, if you can play it like a ninja, or you can play it kind of like a samurai, where's the balance? And the balance currently is in the narrative, because at the start of the game, Jin, the main character, is very much focused on being an honorable samurai. The odds are against them as the Mongols are invading, parts of Japan. There is no numbers game left to play, but he very much wants to focus on taking the enemies head on. Very early in the game, you meet a character who is trying to encourage Jin to engage in more sabotage, more sneaky, stealthy guerrilla warfare. And Jin kind of struggles with the idea of being an honorable samurai who is literally stabbing his enemies in the back, literally, sneaking up behind them, slitting their throats and doing that stuff. And that's the part where I just spent a bunch of time, running around doing side missions where I kill a bunch of enemies. And then I go back to a character who's like, Jin, what the hell? I thought you were like a cool samurai guy. Like, why are you being such a coward? And then like wrestling with that. So there is a lot of the story focused around the idea that, you are trying to be an honorable samurai, but realizing that the odds are stacked against you. You need to change up your combat strategy in order to reclaim Japan. So you're slowly making your way through the islands of Japan, clearing out the Mongols, while wrestling with the idea that maybe you've become a monster. Maybe you've dishonored the samurai by leaning into that kind of shinobi ninja tactics of sneaking around and things like that. And I think it's a cool premise. Like, I think it's a great idea. I just think that if I had focused more on the story, I would have felt a little more connected with Jin's struggles with engaging in that type of warfare. Even though, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from walking into a lot of bases and just cutting everybody down in front of you, left, right, and center. There's also a really cool mode in the, or not mode, like ability in the game where if an enemy hasn't spotted you yet, you can actually call out to that enemy and engage in a one-on-one duel. So what happens is you basically initiate something called a standoff. So if you see a bunch of enemies and you're like, hey, motherfuckers, let's go, or whatever, one will approach you, and as they're about to attack, you can hit the heavy attack button, and you'll basically do like a one-hit kill. Like, you're so cool that he didn't even get, you gave him the first hit, and he couldn't even get the first hit on, and you basically just cut that guy up, immediately, and then the other enemies kind of fall in towards you and start attacking, and then the fight is on, right? So they've introduced combat mechanics to try to balance between, do you want to play it as a samurai? Do you want to play it as ninja? But really, if you're going to get through a lot of that game, you are going to need to play stealthy. I have done story missions where if I'm caught, the mission is over. I got to repeat it, back to the checkpoint, stuff like that. Even though, there are characters in the game that are disappointed to find out that Jin is operating in this way. It's an interesting story. I'm very curious to see where it goes, and I don't mind that, like, it has maybe been uneven at the start. I recognize that, open world games let you approach them however you'd like, which means that you can, get out of the vault of something like Fallout 4 and then 60 hours later be like, oh, right, I got to figure out what happened to my son, or whatever the case may be, right? Which is interesting. And that is to say that I'm really enjoying it. I think the combat has a really great weight to it. I think the tools that they give you for doing things like assassinations are plenty of fun. I got no beef with the way that it is inspired by things like Assassin's Creed, but I think that sword play has a great weight to it, a good sense of danger in terms of, like, if I make one wrong move, like, they're going to open me up and it's going to be really hard to get out of this combat encounter, or I'm surrounded. I got guys shooting me with arrows and I'm just a guy with a sword and all that stuff. It's a lot of fun. It's really great. The other thing I'll say is that game is absolutely gorgeous. Like, just good Lord. If there's ever been a game that made me wish I had a better monitor, I'm currently playing my games on a 1080p LCD monitor that has 144 hertz, which means that I can run the games at a higher frame rate, so they look really smooth, but they maybe don't have the higher resolution of something like a 4K TV. It does not have the brightness or the contrast, the color accuracy of something like an OLED monitor, a QLED monitor, a mini LED monitor. So there is this part of me that's like, God, this game looks absolutely gorgeous. It has such a great style to it. It's not even necessarily that it's a technical achievement from the perspective of, like, that's the most realistic dude or realistic sword I've ever seen, but more of this idea that, like, the game just kind of looks like a painting in motion. It just has such a beautiful set of rich color and contrast and lighting and shadows and just, kind of depth of field. Like, it's a lot of that stuff, particle effects that make it so beautiful. The other thing I'll say is that the open world has a really fantastic design to it. So because it's an open world game, you can open up your main map and you can see all the icons on the map. But when you close that map and you're in the world, there's no mini map, there's no compass, there's no anything to guide you, except when you open up, say, the map in the main game, in the main pause menu, and you move your icon to say, okay, this has a Mongolian fortress. I want to go take out the Mongolian fortress. You press the A button, X button, whatever, to pin it on your map. You go back, and again, there's nothing necessarily to guide you there, except it does this really cool thing where when you have highlighted an icon on your map and you need guidance on where to go, the wind in the game actually blows in the direction of where you're supposed to go, which is so cool because you just come across these sweeping fields of flowers blowing in the wind, grass blowing in the wind, trees rustling, and it just looks so gorgeous. And I think it's this really fantastic idea of, like, hey, we don't want you to take this very narrow path to wherever it is you want to go. The game will guide you in that direction, but what if you come across something on the beaten path and you get, distracted, right? If you get distracted in the open world, just follow the wind, and wherever you set your marker at, it will guide you. It will give you a rough, I'm 300 meters away from my objective, 200 meters away in the corner. Like, it will give you a very small indicator. But the idea is that, like, just follow the wind, man. And I think that's so cool. I really like when open world games give me you know, an incentive for exploring the world, but still find a way to let me get from point A to B easily. And I think Ghost of Tsushima might do it the best, in my opinion. Like, it's just so cool to see that, you know, effect kick in every time you change to a different location, or choose a different objective on the map to go to a different collectible, whatever. But it's not just that the wind will guide you. There are a couple of collectibles in the game. One of them is these fox dens. And if you come across a fox in the open world, like, the game doesn't really tell you this, but if you are running around in the open world, or you're on your horse or whatever, and you come across a fox, just follow the fox, and the fox will eventually lead you to one of the collectibles in the game. And then you pick up the collectible. It's like, hey, you found like 8 of the 12 things or whatever. And then at the end, you can pet the fox, and the fox is all happy and excited that you followed it, and you get to pet it. And it's a really cute moment. And that's also super cool. Like, I don't see a lot of games that give you nature as a proper indicator for where you're supposed to go and what you're supposed to do. You can often see smoke in the distance and things like that indicate that, like, oh, there's an outpost, a fortress of some kind, you know, guarded by the Mongols that you can go and take on. But I don't want to compare it just for the sake of comparison. I really do mean it. Like, it's probably the closest I felt since something like Red Dead, where the world just lets you mosey into it with such grace and fluidity, and stop and smell the roses, or be hyper focused on, you know, getting from A to B to C, whatever. And so on and so forth. Like, I really find it's just to be a gorgeous world to just kind of to marinate in, for lack of a better word. Run across this field of flowers, or, you know, there's also birds in the game that will also allow you to follow them to show off different collectibles and stuff like that in the environment. But there's also you know, different abilities and upgrades. So, like, I have an armor. I'm wearing a set of armor that when I come across a collectible, a firefly will actually just appear out of the environment and guide me to that collectible once I get close enough to it, which is a lot of fun, which will also make it easier to clean up, you know, different collectibles and trophies and all that stuff. But so far, you know, so good. I think the combat is pretty fantastic for the most part. That world is absolutely gorgeous. I understand what they're trying to do with the story, even if a lot of the other side content gets in the way of emotionally engaging with that story or at least for the initial kind of go at it. But I'm really blown away. I'm really impressed by Ghost of Tsushima, even though it is one of those types of open world games in terms of lots of stuff on the map to go and collect and all that stuff. I think it's presented incredibly smartly. I think it has a tremendous kind of vibe and setting, which is really unlike a lot of other games that I've played. It's beautiful, not just in terms of technical, but I think just its spirit and its vibe is just something that really, really resonates with me, because I think you get these beautiful, slow moments of just being out there with the cherry blossoms or in the forest or wherever. And I think that contrasts really nicely with, like, oh, I just went through this base and murdered everyone in this base, and I'm now completely covered in blood. But, you know, 10 minutes later, I followed a fox that took me to a hot springs, and I got to have a bath, and it allows me to kind of, you know, the game actually is like, hey, do you want to reflect on any of the moments that have been in the game so far? And you get to choose. There's also a mini game where you get to compose your own haiku, which is also fucking cool. Like, it's just a cool ass game. Like, it's like quickly becoming one of my most favorite open world action games that I've played in a very long time. I am absolutely loving it. I haven't even tried the multiplayer mode. My understanding is the multiplayer mode is a cooperative online experience where you're teaming up with other people to take on enemies and stuff like that. I haven't even had a chance to play that because I've just been kind of vibing in Ghost of Tsushima. But so far, really two thumbs up. I am so happy with how that game has turned out. It's gorgeous on PC. The technical issues that I've had have been a little weird, but nothing too bad, considering how rewarding that game feels top to bottom. So really happy with Ghost of Tsushima. And then finally, I want to say that like there are a lot of games that I want to get around to playing for next week. So probably no Diablo talk, but next week I am going to be talking about Hellblade 2. I'm also going to be finally picking up X Defiant. That's the Ubisoft shooter that came out earlier this week, as well as Haunty. Haunty is a new kind of indie game, indie kind of action adventure game. Really great, gorgeous looking art style in Haunty. I don't know how else to describe it, but I will be playing that to talk about next week as well. Galacticare, also out now on Game Pass. Galacticare is a intergalactic hospital management simulator where you are taking on alien patients and running your own hospital in the cosmos. And that sounds really neat. Maybe I'll get a chance to check that out. But really for next week, it is Senua's Saga, Hellblade 2, it is Haunty, and it is X Defiant. And this podcast has ran incredibly long. Oh, Little Kitty Big City came out last week. I didn't get a chance to play that. Maybe I'll play that. There's so much to play and talk about. But man, I just cannot stress enough. Go play Ghost of Tsushima. Like, I don't care if you are not a big fan of open world action games. I don't care if you got, burnt out by, this and that or whatever. Like, it, in my opinion, is one of the best open world games I've played in a very, very long time. And if you play it, I think you're really going to really enjoy it. Maybe you got to bump down the difficulty because sometimes that combat can get pretty steep. But other than that, it is fantastic. And that is going to do it for the podcast. I have been GnittWitt. You can find everything that I do over at my Linktree, linktree.com/GnittWitt, GnittWitt, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram Threads. I am all over the place. I'm going to try to peel myself away from Ghost of Tsushima, but I'm going to have to probably focus a lot more on the story going forward until I am closer to finishing it, then go back and do a lot of the side stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot to talk about next week. We'll see how much I get to playing these other games. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate the support. I know these podcasts have gone long. Maybe we can kind of, get it a little bit tighter, a little bit of a shorter episode for next week. We shall see, but we'll see you next week. Thank you for watching, listening, and hanging out. Take care. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.